No one on set expected anything unusual that day. It was supposed to be another routine confessional, another afternoon of cameras, lights, and carefully curated emotions. But the moment the producer leaned forward and asked the question that would soon become the most infamous moment in the show's history, the entire energy in the room shifted. It was subtle at first, an intake of breath from one camera operator, a tightening of posture from the sound tech. But for those who had filmed the Brown story for years, it was enough to recognize that something was about to erupt. And at the center of it all sat Robyn Brown, who had no idea that a simple hypothetical question was about to rip open the very image she had spent a decade constructing. "How would you react?" the producer asked softly, as if trying to sound as gentle as possible, "if one of the ex-wives wanted to return to the family?" The question hovered in the air like a ghost that shouldn't exist, a ghost that Robyn clearly did not want summoned. Her eyes snapped upward, not angry at first, just startled, like a deer caught in headlights. Then her breath hitched, her shoulders tightened, and her voice came out thin, disbelieving, almost trembling. "Return? To the family? What?" She tried to laugh, but it died in her throat, collapsing under the weight of something deeper, something she could no longer control. The producer waited, silent, giving her space to find her footing. But instead of stabilizing, Robyn began unraveling. "I don't. Am I supposed to answer that? Really?" She shook her head quickly, too quickly, as if trying to physically shake the question out of existence. Her hands fidgeted in her lap. Her eyes darted. And then something cracked. "I don't want to even go there," she whispered, but the whisper carried the tremor of panic. You're making me sad right now. I can't go down that road. I can't even think about that. I'll fall apart, and I can't do that here. I can't be on camera like that." But the producer wasn't done. Not yet. Not even close. He let her breathe, let her swallow the tension filling her chest. And then, with the kind of calm precision only a seasoned reality show producer could wield, he delivered the real question, the one that would ignite everything that followed, the one that would expose a decade's worth of speculation, whispers, and accusations. If Kody had divided his time equally between all 4 wives from the very beginning, would you still have wanted to join the family? The reaction was instantaneous. It wasn't a pause. It wasn't hesitation. It was a visceral, physical shockwave rolling through her body. Her eyes widened as if the world had tilted. Her lips parted, but no words came out. And then, suddenly, she snapped, her voice rising in a pitch the crew had never heard from her before. "That's not, no. No. You can't ask me that. That's not fair. That is not a fair question." She leaned forward, her hands gripping her knees, her breathing speeding into shallow bursts. People behind the camera exchanged glances. One production assistant froze, unsure whether to step in or stay out of the blast radius. In 20 seasons, they had captured tears, anger, heartbreak, resentment, but they had never seen this. "You're trying to make me look bad," she snapped, her voice strangled by something beyond frustration, beyond defensiveness. "You're trying to make it seem like I wanted him all to myself. That's not what happened. That's not what happened." But here's the thing, no one had accused her of anything. The producer had simply asked a hypothetical, a what if. And yet this what if had sliced clean through the facade Robyn had maintained for so long. Because in that moment, her reaction betrayed something far deeper than irritation. It revealed fear. Panic. A truth she had perhaps buried even from herself. The producer didn't move, didn't raise his voice, didn't match her panic. He simply watched her, letting her spiral, letting her reveal far more than any direct question ever could. It was the kind of moment reality television dreams of, but rarely receives, a raw, unfiltered, unprotected human breakdown. Robyn shot to her feet, so fast the microphone cord jerked. "This is ridiculous," she shouted, pacing like a storm trapped inside a small room. "I came into this family with pure intentions. Pure intentions. I loved Kody. I believed in sisterhood. I believed in plural marriage. I sacrificed everything for this family. Everything. But even as she ranted, she didn't answer the question. She kept circling it, dancing around it, avoiding it like it carried fire. Because she knew, deep down, that the answer would expose her. And not just to the fans, not just to the cameras. It would expose her to herself. Her pacing quickened. Her hands flew into the air. She wiped at her eyes furiously, as if trying to force the tears out before they could betray her in the wrong way. I have always supported the other wives. I have always tried to make this family work. Everyone always blames me for everything that goes wrong, and now you're doing it too. But still, no answer. And that silence? That refusal to say a simple yes or no. That was the answer. A camera operator later said it was the most honest moment he had ever filmed. Because in that instant, stripped of her carefully crafted persona, stripped of the soft-spoken martyr image she had worn like armor, Robyn showed something she had never allowed herself to show before. Guilt. The kind that doesn't come from wrongdoing, but from knowing the world sees something you've denied. Behind the scenes, the crew exchanged glances, silent, shocked, bracing for whatever would come next. Because they could all feel it in the air. The meltdown wasn't over. It was only beginning. The storm inside her refused to settle. She looked like someone trying to outrun her own reflection, terrified of the truth chasing her. The producer tried again, but with a tone so steady it only made Robyn more unstable. "It's just a question," he said gently. "We're not accusing you of anything. We just want your thoughts." But she heard accusation in every syllable. She heard the years of fan speculation. She heard the unspoken truths from the other wives. She heard everything she tried to pretend wasn't there. And suddenly, she turned toward him, eyes blazing with a mixture of anger, fear, and something dangerously close to confession. "You don't understand," she cried, throwing her hands up in frustration. "You don't know what it was like. When I came into this family, I was promised something. I was told we'd all be equal, that we'd all work together, that we'd all be sisters. That's what I agreed to. That's what I believed in. And now you're making it sound like I planned some kind of takeover. That's not who I am." But her voice shook at the end, because she knew. She had seen the way fans talked about her online. She had seen the endless Reddit threads, the TikTok dissections, the memes, the assumptions, the hints from the other wives. She had spent years insisting she wasn't the favorite, insisting she wasn't manipulating anything, insisting that she wasn't the reason everything fell apart. And suddenly, with one question, all those years of denial were teetering at the edge of collapse. The producer didn't push her. Instead, he simply repeated, "Then why not answer the question?" But that simple sentence landed with the weight of a sledgehammer. Robyn blinked, her body going still for the first time since the meltdown began. The room felt cold, too quiet. Her throat tightened as she stared at the floor, then at the cameras, then at the producer, each movement slower, heavier, more vulnerable than the last. And everyone felt it. The shift, the realization, the dread. Because the truth was simple. If she had believed her own narrative, she would have said yes. She would have said, "Of course, I would have joined the family no matter what." She would have said, "It wouldn't have mattered how much time Kody spent with anyone. I joined because I believed in the principle." But she didn't. She couldn't. Because deep down, she knew the life she had now was not the life Christine had suffered through. It was not Janelle's lonely, neglected experience. It was not Meri's decades of emotional abandonment. Robyn had never felt those things. She had been protected from that pain, shielded by Kody's devotion in ways the others never were. And imagining herself receiving only a fraction of his attention, imagining herself sharing him equally, was unthinkable. A soft knock sounded on the side door. A production assistant leaned in carefully, eyes scanning the scene with obvious concern. The meltdown had reached a point where the crew wasn't sure if they should intervene. But before anyone could say anything, Robyn turned her face away, taking a shaky breath as she wiped her cheeks again, trying to regain some control, some shred of composure. She sank back into her chair, but she didn't look calmer. She looked defeated, shaken, exposed in a way that no amount of editing could hide. "You don't get it," she whispered. "You don't understand what this question does. You're opening up wounds. You're making me think about things I've tried not to think about. Things that will break me." Her voice cracked again. One of the camera operators swallowed hard. It was rare, almost unheard of, to witness Robyn lose control like this. Tears, yes. Emotional monologues, yes. But this was raw. This was unfiltered. This was a truth she had spent years burying, suddenly clawing its way to the surface. The producer leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "Then tell us what scares you about answering." It was a gentle invitation, but it also cornered her. Robyn shook her head violently, as if trying to dislodge the thought forming inside it. "No," she muttered. "No, because if I say it, if I even admit it out loud, people will twist it. People will use it against me. They always do. They always do." Another tear slid down her face, but this time she didn't wipe it away. She let it fall, shoulders trembling. The room was silent except for her unsteady breathing. The lights felt too bright, the cameras suddenly too close. She tried to look anywhere except the producer's eyes, but the panic kept returning, tightening her chest. And then, almost as if the truth slipped out without her permission, she whispered, barely audible, "I don't know if I would have joined. Okay? I don't know." Her words hung in the air, fragile and heartbreaking. But before anyone could react, she stood again, the panic returning in an instant. "But that doesn't mean anything. Don't twist it. Don't you twist that into something ugly." The producer, caught between professionalism and concern, raised his hand slightly. "We're not twisting anything. We're just documenting what you feel." "And oh," she screamed suddenly, startling the crew. "No, that's not what you want. Every time I say something, you cut it, you edit it, you make it look like I'm the problem. You don't care how I feel. You don't care how hard this has been for me." Her breakdown crescendoed, her voice echoing off the walls. It was too much, too big, too intense. And the crew knew there was no coming back from this moment without pausing everything. One of the producers nodded subtly to the director. The call was made. "Cut. Take 5. The cameras shut off. The lights dimmed. The studio that had been humming with tension moments earlier now felt heavy with silence. Robyn stood frozen in place, as if she hadn't heard the words. Then, without warning, she turned and marched toward her dressing room, slamming the door behind her so hard the walls trembled. Inside, muffled sobbing echoed through the hallway. Production staff exchanged uneasy glances. Some whispered to one another, unsure what would happen next. Others stood in stunned silence, processing the gravity of what they had just witnessed. Because this wasn't just a meltdown. This was a confession without words. A truth accidentally revealed. And behind that closed door, Robyn Brown, the woman who had always held her emotions like a shield, was finally falling apart. The silence between them had become something living, an invisible force stretching from one end of the room to the other, breathing with a kind of cold hostility neither wanted to acknowledge. Every unresolved memory, each accusation, every wound that had been quietly festering for years, suddenly felt like it had been waiting for this exact moment to rise. And when she finally opened her mouth to speak, her voice was steady, almost eerily controlled, even though inside her chest everything trembled and burned. "There's a version of me you don't know," she said, the words landing with unexpected heaviness. "Or maybe you didn't know her once. Maybe you loved her once. But somewhere along the way, she became someone you stopped seeing." There was no anger in her tone, just exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that came from years of being unheard, brushed aside and blamed. Years of holding the family together while being told she was the reason it was falling apart. He didn't interrupt. Maybe he didn't know how. Maybe he couldn't. She continued, her eyes never leaving his. "You say you were trying. You say you cared. But caring isn't absence. Caring isn't disappearing when things get hard and reappearing when you want to feel like the hero. Caring isn't watching your family come apart and then telling everyone it's their fault." He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. "I didn't disappear," he insisted, though even he sounded uncertain of his own words. "No," she said softly. "You faded." His breath caught, but she didn't stop. "You faded into your anger, into your pride, into your resentments, into your assumptions about what everyone thought, what everyone wanted, what everyone was trying to do to you. You kept telling us what we felt instead of asking. You kept assuming betrayal where there was only pain. And maybe you thought you were protecting yourself. But what you really did was isolate yourself from the people who still loved you." He looked away then, staring at the floor as if trying to gather pieces of himself he had lost long ago. "And Robyn?" she asked quietly, the name slicing through the air like a blade wrapped in velvet. "You ask how I feel about seeing her? Our last interaction wasn't just weird. It was revealing." She kept acting like she was confused about why I pulled away, like she couldn't understand why everything felt different. But it wasn't confusion. It was denial. Her hands tightened slightly in her lap, the slightest tremor visible. "I don't hate her. I don't want to hate anybody. But you both built a world where everything was about protecting your relationship, even if it meant sacrificing the rest of us. And then you wondered why we stopped coming around. You wondered why conversations became awkward. You wondered why the air felt heavy every time we tried to pretend nothing was wrong." He lifted his head, eyes clouded. "It wasn't like that," he said, though the conviction in his voice had already begun to crumble. "It was exactly like that," she replied. "And the only reason you can't see it is because you've never had to sit in the silence the rest of us lived in. You didn't notice when the laughter stopped in the house. You didn't notice when the kids started becoming careful with their words. You didn't notice when love became something that required strategy instead of trust." She drew a long breath. Each word weighted. "Do you know what it feels like to walk into a home that used to be filled with warmth and suddenly feel like a stranger in it? To feel like everyone expects you to be the problem before you even speak? That's what I walked into for years." Years. Her voice cracked, just for a moment. Just enough to reveal the depth of everything she'd tried so hard to contain. "And still," she whispered, "I kept showing up, even when it hurt. Even when the love I gave felt like it was dissolving into the air before it ever reached anyone." He looked like he wanted to respond, but the words wouldn't come. His hands, usually steady, fidgeted restlessly, thumb rubbing over knuckles as though trying to erase something invisible. She leaned back slightly, her chest rising and falling as she steadied herself. "The truth is, I'm not angry anymore. Anger burned me out. It hollowed me. It made me someone I don't want to be. I'm tired. Just tired. Tired of protecting people who never protected me. Tired of apologizing for emotions I was allowed to have. Tired of waiting for someone else to finally say, 'You deserved better.'" She let the silence return, but this time, it wasn't fragile. It was final. It carried the weight of someone who had finally stopped holding on. "And you know what?" she said, her voice returning with a new, quiet strength. "I hope you find peace. I genuinely do. But I can't keep sacrificing my own peace in the hope that one day you'll finally understand mine." The room felt different now, like something long buried had finally risen to the surface and dissipated. He exhaled slowly, looking at her with a bewildered expression, as though he was seeing her for the first time in years. "Is there anything left to fix?" he asked, barely audible. She hesitated, not out of doubt, but out of honesty. "There's always something left," she said gently. "But not everything that's left is worth breaking yourself to repair." The words lingered like smoke. And in that moment, raw, quiet, suspended between what was and what could never be again, something shifted. A truth neither of them could unheard settled between them. Some endings don't come with closure. Some endings come with clarity. And sometimes clarity is enough. The air in the room felt heavier than it had moments before, thick with the weight of everything spoken, and everything that could no longer be unsaid. For a long stretch of silence, neither of them moved. The words, raw and trembling, still hung between them like shards of glass suspended midair. Everything that had been buried for years had finally clawed its way to the surface, and now the two of them were left standing in a truth that neither had been prepared to face. He shifted first, a slow exhale escaping him as though he had been holding his breath for a lifetime. His shoulders, always tense, seemed to sag under the realization that the version of the family he had been clinging to existed only in memory, and even that memory had become distorted by years of denial and fear. "You talk like it's already over," he murmured, voice small, almost unfamiliar. She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze drifted toward the window, where a sliver of fading daylight painted the floor in muted gold. The world outside kept moving, people driving home, children laughing somewhere down the street, the soft hum of life continuing as if nothing monumental had occurred inside these walls. It was almost cruel to think that the universe didn't pause for heartbreak. "It's not about being over," she finally said, her voice steadier now. "It's about understanding that the way things were can't be the way things will be." He blinked, struggling to process the distinction. "But we can—" "No," she cut in gently, without malice. "We can't go back and fix the past. We can't rewrite the years of hurt. We can't unfeel what we felt. And we shouldn't pretend that some apology or one conversation is going to heal everything. Life doesn't work that way. Families don't work that way." He pressed his thumb into his palm, a nervous habit he had never quite outgrown. "Then what do? We stop pretending," she said. "We stop forcing a broken picture back into the frame just because it used to look beautiful. We accept that things cracked. And maybe," she added softly, "maybe they cracked because they were supposed to." He stared at her, the truth sinking in through layers of defensiveness he had built over years. Parts of him wanted to argue, to insist that everything could still be salvaged if they just tried harder. But deep down, deep where old resentments and unspoken fears lived, he knew she was right. She leaned forward, folding her hands in her lap. "For so long, I thought loving you meant holding everything together, fixing every conflict, carrying every burden, absorbing every blow, and pretending it didn't bruise. But love isn't martyrdom. Love isn't sacrificing your soul just to keep a family from falling apart. Love is supposed to make you feel safe,
Heard. Seen.
And somewhere along the line, I stopped feeling all of that." He looked wounded, but not surprised. His eyes softened, filled with something that looked almost like regret. "I wish I had understood sooner." "So do I," she admitted. "But understanding too late is its own kind of tragedy." Her heartbeat thrummed steadily now, stronger than it had been in years. She realized in that moment that she wasn't speaking from a place of bitterness anymore. She wasn't trying to win an argument or claim moral victory. She was speaking from a place of clarity, from a place of finally knowing herself enough to stop shrinking for the sake of someone else's comfort. He rubbed his forehead, a deep sigh pulling from him. "And the kids, they feel this too? The distance?" She nodded. "They felt it long before we admitted it. Children always know. They sense tension even when we hide it in smiles and polite words. They can feel when a family is clinging together instead of growing together." He closed his eyes at that, the truth cutting more deeply than he expected. "I thought I was doing what was best for them." "You were doing what was best for the version of the family you imagined," she said softly. "Not the version that actually existed." Another silence settled between them, but this one felt different. It wasn't sharp or suffocating. It was reflective, almost peaceful. "And Robyn?" he asked finally, though the question came reluctantly, as if he already feared the answer. She gave a small, weary smile, sad, but sincere. "I don't hate her. I never did. But there's a difference between forgiving someone and welcoming them into your heart again. There's a difference between understanding someone's intentions and inviting them back into spaces that used to be safe for you. My distance from her, it wasn't punishment. It was self-preservation." He nodded slowly, absorbing the nuance he had refused to see before. "I don't want drama," she continued. "I don't want accusations or blame. I just want peace. For myself. For the kids. For the future. I want a life where I'm not constantly trying to earn someone's approval or affection." Her voice grew soft, but powerful. I want a life where love doesn't feel like a battlefield. The room felt warmer somehow, as if her clarity had shifted the atmosphere itself. He leaned back, staring at her with eyes that held a complex mix of sorrow, admiration, and the dawning understanding that he had pushed too hard for too long, without ever noticing the cracks forming beneath his feet. "So what happens now?" he asked, barely above a whisper. She took a breath, not heavy, not hesitant, but calm, like someone who is finally ready to face the future without apology. "Now we rebuild, but not as we were. Not as a forced version of a family we kept pretending still existed. We rebuild as individuals who are finally honest with themselves and each other."